Hi everyone, Griffin here, the armchair historian and game director for Armchair History Interactive. I've been wanting to make this video for a while now, but have just never really found the time to sit down and talk about things. Now that our next game is well underway, I figured it would be a good time to speak about what happened to Fire and Maneuver before we start releasing devlogs for our next project. So I don't really have a script for this video, but I do have some bullet points to go over, and I'm happy to answer your guys' questions in the comments if there are things that I forgot to talk about, or maybe if I gloss over something and you want me to talk about it in more depth. But I figure this can kind of be a definitive video for those who have questions about why Fire and Maneuver is so buggy, or why it was abandoned, as people like to say, or any kind of number of questions that you guys have. Hopefully I can answer a lot of them in this video. So the first thing I want to go over is the inception of Fire and Maneuver and what our original plan was. I think a lot of you would be surprised to learn that Fire and Maneuver was originally a World War II RTS game. And so on screen here you can see actually some of like the early prototyping of our 2D World War II RTS. This project was ultimately not developed any further for two main reasons. The first one was we really didn't have a gameplay loop in mind, or we had a battle system, but I didn't really know what else we wanted to do with it. The second thing is my studio started with just me, and I'm not a coder. I just have my brand, my channel, my funding, and I like to do design, so that's kind of what I'm bringing. And I can kind of, during COVID, I was able to afford to put together a studio, and so I can start bringing in like artists and animators and coordinating people. But at the time, just this World War II project that you're seeing was just made by one of our animators, or someone who started as an animator on our channel named Aaron. And he would go on to code everything for this project. And then for the Fire and Maneuver you guys know, that is the game that he was leading under my direction. One thing I do want to preface as well, for anything you want to blame about how the game went, in terms of how buggy it is, or if you didn't like the gameplay, or that it never was fully realized in the way that you may have imagined it, or the way that we hyped it up to be, I take full responsibility for all of that. This isn't some kind of like apology video or anything like that, but I just want to make it super clear, like the developers who worked on the project, everybody got done what I gave them. There were some cases where certain developers maybe built things with infrastructure that just wasn't as good as we needed it to be. But overall, I think just a lack of experience and just poor leadership on my part for the studio. I'd never released a game before, and so trying to do this giant mega project as my first game that I was leading, just especially as a person who wasn't involved in either drawing the individual assets or coding, I just took this approach of just thinking of the game I wanted to make and trying to just throwing money at the problem and trying to get it to be made. But anyways, me and Aaron were working on this World War II project, and we really didn't have much of a direction for it. I think the other issue too is we wanted to do something 2D that was in our art style, but doing a World War II game where troops need to be in buildings up high, or a tank could fire at certain other parts of a tank, a lot of those like 3D really helps with that sort of game, and we wanted to do 2D sprites at the time. So doing a game that was so reliant on having, even think about like airplanes or artillery firing down. There are illusions that you can do, but one of the original visions for the World War II Fire Maneuver was to set it during Operation Market Garden with bridges. And imagine trying to have guys go under and through and over bridges that are collapsible in 2D. It's just a little bit difficult, especially for our first game. So we thought, all right, let's maybe think of a different plan. I had over Christmas, I had designed a tabletop wargaming system set in the 19th century. And I had presented this to Aaron to actually change and overwrite what we had done for Fire and Maneuver, because we thought, well, look, it's probably simpler because I can design it. As the designer for it, I can design the whole thing as a board game, and then you can just code the rules that I write for it. So I can basically be a board game designer, and we can translate it that way. So that was kind of the mindset that we took. I think, again, one of the issues, though, if you look between the World War II version or the version you guys know, there was no gameplay loop. Like I was saying, I can build a system for how battles work, but what does the player actually do? And I don't think that really even got addressed until the very end of development. But anyways, we changed plans. We went for this kind of 1800s Victorian theme. I did think something that was redeemable was picking a time period in the Victorian time that was not covered very much. It's still not covered. So I do think that was a redeeming part of the game that I think got a lot of people initially interested, but just in terms of the gameplay loop from the very start, we didn't really have a very clear plan. Over time, over the course of the development of the game, we started growing the scope, and I think the initial vision was just have a battle system. We originally released Fire Maneuver as a tabletop simulator module that you could install, and we actually were building a community that was pretty active that would fight battles using the board game for Fire Maneuver. So we thought at the very least we'd just make a battle system. But something that we realized is that most people who play strategy games like single player. Most people, I mean, when you guys go play Hearts of Iron or Total War or whatever it is, most of the matches you play are going to be single player. It wasn't a lot of multiplayer focused strategy games were like early 2000s or late 90s type of like fast-paced RTS games, and a lot of games that are multiplayer focused strategy games today that are made don't end up doing so well, and they're very difficult to do. But that was the initial plan for it, and we did realize that we'll need some kind of single player, so we started to bring on additional developers to the project. And so it went from just Aaron working on it to mid-project adding in one developer, then another, and then another on top of that. And they were spaced out maybe every 3 months. So the studio, as it was hitting each checkpoint, or the game was hitting each checkpoint, getting closer to release, we were adding additional people on. And that also came kind of with its own problems. Not because of those developers, but just because if you're just adding on bits and pieces of the team or huge chunks of the team over the course of development, getting very close, then you have to get people caught up. You've got to assign them things to work on. You've got to build a management system. We hadn't done a lot of that, and I think, I was just very naive in putting a lot of that together, and we would just kind of come up with things, or I would come up with things where we said, okay, we want to still have the multiplayer system. Why don't we have a ranked multiplayer system? We should have leaderboards with the multiplayer. We should have a custom battle system, multiple AIs that you can fight against, AI personalities that you can fight against. You could have a 2v2 mode in addition to a 1v1 mode, and so on. So all of these little things, some of these you guys I'm sure are familiar with, like being able to fight a 2v2 or fighting a multiplayer battle in Total War, for example. These don't seem like huge features. These seem like features that you would find in a lot of historical strategy games. I think the issue with our game is that I was putting all of them together. And for your first game, something you really don't realize is something that seems as simple as like a ranked leaderboard or just multiplayer in general is a massive undertaking. I don't think you guys realize this as well. Many of the games, historical strategy or otherwise, that have a multiplayer component, that could potentially double or triple development time in general just by having multiplayer. That's not even considering all the modes and systems within it, but just the networking and the bugs and all of that. A lot of people who play tested Fire Maneuver early on, we had no AI, they were just playing against each other, and there were so many bugs, almost all network and synchronization based. Doing multiplayer is so difficult. So for us to do that for our first game was just, it didn't make sense. If we had the whole team and the whole scope of the game planned out from the start and weren't building as we went, then maybe it would have been more feasible. But even now that we're moving on to Master of Command and that we have our whole studio, we're not doing multiplayer. We picked one campaign system with a definitive gameplay loop, and that's all we're focusing on. I think that's really important for new studios to just really make sure. I mean, multiplayer is not something that you can just throw in, or especially halfway through a project, you don't want to do that either. But anyways, I think that was one of the big problems that we had, was trying to introduce multiplayer and trying to bring in a bunch of team members and trying to make it work, and everything that we had to do with multiplayer and bug fixing. I mean, even today, I'm sure you guys, if you've played the game, you'll notice there's still bugs and desynchronization or disconnecting from multiplayer. That's still in today, and it's been years and years of development that we worked on the game. So I think in general, you just have to be so careful. So that's probably one of the biggest mistakes we made for the game. Just to expand on that, the lead developer now for Master of Command was a developer we brought in like 2 months, maybe 2 months or less. We brought him in 2 months before the project went into early access to build an entire campaign system in 1 to 2 months. So that was insane. And I think a lot of people who played during early access, or even now, the campaigns are still rough around the edges because again, it wasn't the fault of the developer. Listen to what I said, where we brought him on just before the game released. How the hell, how are you going to do that? How are you going to make that work on such short notice? So the improvised planning for the game was such a mistake in that way. And yeah, even today, like I was saying, the multiplayer you can still experience bugs with. The campaign you're still going to experience bugs with. A lot of those things were just kind of like tacked on as we went. And something else I want to mention there as well is the early access component of the game. So let's actually step a bit back from the development side. So you guys are clear on the fact that we didn't really plan a gameplay loop. We bit off a bit more than we can chew with all of the different features and multiplayer. And I haven't even gotten to the other features and how how the campaign system expanded, the monetization system expanded, and scenario battles as well. But let's take a step back. The early access component to the game, I think, was also a bit of a problem. I think a lot of early developers struggle with what early access means. And so if you're a first-time developer and you've never released a game before, you don't really know what kind of state you're going to be releasing your game into, or what is actually too early for early access. We went with the early access system, which Steam, if you release a game in early access, Steam is not going to give you full visibility for your early access launch. So you're kind of breaking your visibility into the early access launch, and they're only going to expose you a little bit, and then when you come out of early access, they're going to expose you just a little bit. But they never give you one big push. So that's a benefit to early access if you're not confident you're going to be able to stick the landing. But it also does disperse the traffic coming in, which in our case, I suppose, did help us because our game was buggy. But that wasn't the biggest issue. The issue was not understanding what truly had to be ready for early access, and the game just wasn't ready. And in addition to that, making it free to play. That's where I think all of the bugs I've mentioned, a lot of them, whether they're multiplayer or campaign related, probably could have been worked out at some point. Going free to play made no sense at all for this type of game. I think you guys have probably experienced games where it says free to play on them. You think it's too good to be true. This game looks awesome. And you play it, and it is full of what I can only describe as predatory monetization systems, things coming after you during the game while you're playing, pop-ups or just invasive sort of features and UI that really want to get you to spend money, or locking your progression. Maybe your progression's really fast at the start, so you get hooked on the game. You put in 10 hours or 20 hours into it, but then you start to realize your progress is 100 times slower, or maybe only 2 times slower at first, but I remember playing, and I won't mention any game specifically, but I remember unlocking different vehicles in a game, and it was so rapid at first. You're so excited to keep unlocking things, and then it slows down to such an extent where you put so much time into this, and you want to unlock the next thing, you have no choice but to spend money. When I'm playing a game and having fun, and I feel like I have no choice but to spend money on something, that's not a great feeling as a player. I think for first-time developers as well, or just for a lot of developers, most people got into game development or game design for the passion and love of creating games as an art, not because they're passionate about creating different monetization microtransaction systems. That's not, even if guys at big companies have to build those systems, I don't think it's something that they necessarily enjoy. And likewise, I don't think the players who experience those systems enjoy them either. To me, free-to-play in many cases, not all, but in many cases, perhaps the majority, is a lose-lose situation. Except for the very small amount of games, I don't know, like Fortnite, where you have such a massive volume of players playing a game like that you can afford to make it free because you just need a very small percentage to buy harmless, like, in-game cosmetics, and you have the team. You have the huge team and budget to create an entire cosmetic system and constant updates. Creating a free-to-play live service game is such a massive undertaking. I'm sure you guys have seen many giant AA or AAA companies or games try to embrace a free-to-play live service system and fail. And these are games that have huge studios behind them. So for us to wing the design and development of the game, to bring on team members so close to release, to flesh out major core systems, to undertake multiplayer, as well as launching as an early access title and not really being sure what that means, and having a free-to-play system on top of that is like some of the worst possible things you can combine together. Just even in terms of Steam's visibility for your game. Let's say even if your game was done very well, early access Steam is going to cut your visibility in half, because it's going to spread your visibility between your early access launch and your full 1.0 launch. And then free-to-play, if Steam is not earning money on the sale of your game, they're just not going to promote it. They take their percentage of every single game that comes out, whether indie or AAA, they're going to take a percentage. And if your game is coming out for free, and they're not easily profiting on that, then they're just not going to give visibility to your game. So if you're doing early access and free to play and you don't have the infrastructure and the player base to support it, the game is just dead on arrival. There's no way. And that's even if the game is well made. It is very unlikely, especially for a first-time developer, to make any game like that work at all. In our case, we had a buggy game that was unfinished in early access with free to play. Now, we had to delay major parts of the game being worked on in order to create monetization systems for our launch so that we could fund ourselves through the development of the game, which again is such a big problem. I think if we had charged $5 or $10 for the game, we would have been able to recoup enough money that we could have spent a couple more years actually just working on it and chipping away at it. We had actually the audience for it. We had a lot of interest in the game and a lot of wish lists, a lot of momentum. But we just we completely ran out of funding. It was a free-to-play game. Less than 1% of players, we gave away like 1 or 200,000 copies of Fire and Maneuver, and less than 1% of people spent any money. And we had some items that were $1 in the game or $5 in the game. We had a DLC as well that was like $15, but very few people purchased that as well. It makes you look even worse as well when you put out an early access game with day one DLC, which is what we had to do because we were a free-to-play game, which only hurt our reviews further. But then you think, how else are we supposed to make our money back? And so you've basically now ended up with a game with bugs, too many features to possibly fix, developers who are frantically working on repairing a free-to-play monetization system to try to get money back, no funding for it in early access, and a low review score. All of these things to Steam means they're going to push your game down as much as they possibly can. And so even if we could claw our way back to success, it was pretty much too late at that point. Once people played and realized what the game was, and we realized we couldn't earn any money on it, at that point it was too late. There's basically nothing we could do. And I'm pretty sure we spent over a year continuing to just update the game despite not earning any revenue on it. Not making it free to play would at least give us the funding we would have needed to just hunker down for a couple years and polish the game. Think about how many other games like Cyberpunk or No Man's Sky came out and overpromised and underdelivered, but those games charged like $60, so they made millions of dollars and said, hey, we're pretty much rich now. If we just put our heads down and for years chip away at this, we don't need any more money. Like, we've got this. For us, we had the complete opposite, where we put it out, it desperately needs to be fixed. We have everybody who wants it fixed and a lot of people who want to play it, and absolutely no funding to do that. And any kind of funding we try to get through a DLC or through in-game transactions is seen as scummy or predatory or whatever. So there's just no winning in a situation like that. So anyways, not to go on too much about the money side of things, but that certainly plays a very big role in it. So I hope at the end of this, you guys can kind of get an overview of like what went wrong, what I did wrong, and what we're going to be improving on in the future. I love game design. I want to keep doing this. I enjoy it, honestly, more than I do doing YouTube. I would love to make this a career. So I'm really hoping that we can show you guys that we've improved, that we're going to focus and deliver something that's properly finished and polished that you guys can enjoy. And working on Fire Maneuver was the hardest project I'd ever done. And even today, I would struggle to call it like a good, polished, finished game. It's just not those things. Despite working, during the launch into early access, me and all the devs were working day and night, waking up super early and working all throughout the night. It was absolutely, it was taking a physical toll of how exhausting it was for everybody working on the game. And you can just see how difficult it is when you start adding in so many different features, and you want to do multiplayer, and you want to do single player, and you want to have custom battles, and you want to have mixed AI and player battles, and you want to have scenario modes, and you want to have a progression system, and XP unlocks, and in-game transactions to fund a free-to-play system, and a campaign system, which, by the way, my own design, I wanted to do all these different focused campaigns around the world. That means we had 8 different separate campaigns with 2 playable nations. That's 16 different playthroughs that have to be play-tested. Doing all of that in a rush as my first game just led to so many different problems. So that I hope this just gives you a little bit of insight into how hectic it was to work on Fire Maneuver. Yeah, it's really unfortunate. That game took up about 2 years of my life, and I worked very, very hard on it. The developers worked super hard on it. The artists, some of the music for the game has hundreds of thousands of views. Everybody who worked on the project was working so hard. I think I mainly just have myself to blame as a director. I mean, had I just focused the game in a few core areas, built up our infrastructure and our team early on, and really honed in on one particular type of gameplay loop, and cut the multiplayer crap, cut the free-to-play crap, just released a finished and polished game, I think we would have been in a much different position, and you guys would have ended up with a game that you would have been a lot happier with. And that's unfortunate. It's just difficult because I'm sure you guys, I'm coming from a YouTuber experience, but I'm sure you've heard people give advice about being a YouTuber and saying things like, hey, your first video is not going to be great. It might take you 100 videos before you make your first great video. With video games, you spend 2 years just working on one. So on YouTube videos, I can put out one in a week and go, oh, yeah, I missed the mark here. People don't like it for this reason. I can find these ways to improve. And then you can just keep iterating on it. You get these like short bits of feedback every time you do these little releases, and then you can build up. And I just came in so naively without any research into developing a game and directing one as well, that, yeah, in every possible decision that we could make incorrectly, we pretty much made, except for like the aesthetic and style of the game. And kind of like, I think there are definitely points of, there's merit to what we had created, and you can kind of see, if you really look closely, like what we were going for and what the game could have been. I think a lot of people use the wordage I see as like, oh, there was such wasted potential. I see a lot of that, which is also heartbreaking to that. Like, I think when people say I abandoned the game or I was greedy about it or something, it's like, I hope this video just gives you a bit of insight into it was hell for us to develop. It was not a profitable game. You guys were left unhappy. We were left unhappy. I think in no case was this I think at one point there was a top comment just saying it was a money grab. I think the optics of what we were trying to do were so poorly conveyed, and people didn't realize how hectic it was for us. Any of those monetization systems or DLC that you saw was because it was a free-to-play game, so we needed to try to fund our studio, and we never got it. I mean, the entire development of the game, except for maybe the first month or two, I had to inject my own funding for it. All my personal savings I earned during COVID when my YouTube channel was blowing up, I had invested that into the game and lost all of it. I think by now that the game's been out for a while, I've probably broken even on it, but we certainly never profited. And I'm still running the studio now, but yeah, that game was just a huge learning experience. I think the best thing that we can do is, instead of continuously trying to work on that game, despite it's already been given out for free to hundreds of thousands of people, there's no potential market left that you can get people to spend money on the game to earn back any of that development, let alone profit, right? Just like talking about earning the development time and the money that you put in, if you're going to get that out. And that's just not the case. So we're working on our next game called Master of Command 7 Years War. This project is scoped down, which I know a lot of you are going to it may seem like, hey, you worked on this big game, and why does the second one look smaller? Or you're not, now that there's no multiplayer and there's no cosmetics, or there's no any of this or that. But we decided to really focus down on one core gameplay loop for Master of Command. I hope that we can win you back not through words, but just through proof that it'll be a good and fun game. We're not doing, at least right now, we have no plans to do custom battles or multiplayer battles or scenario battles. We just have one core campaign system, which has a very definitive gameplay loop for you to experience. It has progression, it has replayability, and the battle system is just polished, refined, and we're not trying to take on the whole world. With Fire Maneuver, we had the American Civil War, Japan, Italy, Crimea, and Russia, France, Germany, all these locations. This time we're just focusing in, honing down on one particular area with just 5 countries, not trying to do the 9+ that we did for Fire Maneuver. And so I'm figuring with this more refined scope and scale, we have the ability to polish what we're working on way more than anything we were able to do with Fire Maneuver. And any of the developers who made mistakes, because we all made mistakes, they were all able to use that as a lesson too. Just as I learned how to be a better game designer and a leader, I think they also learned, in terms of take a look at the optimization and performance of Fire Maneuver. It's not very good. That's something that we spent like a month doing research on before even starting Master of Command. And so I think in all ways, everybody who's part of our team has learned so much from that experience. And so, yeah, I'm just hoping to prove to you guys that we can do better than what we did with Fire Maneuver. And if you give us that chance and Master of Command succeeds, then hopefully we can keep making games and eventually get to a game that surpasses kind of that scope and scale of Fire Maneuver and is polished and complete that you guys love. And that's where I'm hoping to end up. I will end on the note as well. I'm probably going to stay away from early access unless it fits. We'll see. I'm just generally not too enthusiastic to do it, but the one thing I'm certainly never going to do is a free-to-play game again. I know it's exciting to get something for free, but you guys are going to be unhappy with a free-to-play game, and we're going to be unhappy. That's it for me. If you have any questions about it, I'd be happy to go down into the comments. Even if you've got some really harsh criticism or some tough questions, I will jump in and answer whatever you guys want to talk about. And I hope that you'll see me in a week or two when we do our first big Master of Command devlog showing off the battle system. So that's it for me. I will see you guys. Take care.